Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very delighted to participate today at the Peggy Lillis Foundation Summit as a speaker, even if it's virtually today. It's a very good thing that such events can take place online in this particular pandemic period. To present myself, I'm Lise Lurienne. I'm a pharmacist and I work at Volterra as a market access manager. And just a word about Volterra. So Volterra is a biotechnology company based in Paris, in France. And we are developing novel therapeutic options, preserving patients' microbiota to prevent and cure life-threatening disease such as the topic of today, C. difficile infection. So before my presentation, and this is very important for me, I would like to thank Christian and his entire team to organize for all their energy in organizing this event, and also for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation of CDI, patient quality of life. So I will put the presentation up just like this. And so you may have noticed, unfortunately, I was not able to be there in live among you. Nevertheless, it seems very essential to raise the subject of quality of life of CDI patients. It's very a foremost of importance topic. As you may have had the opportunity since the start of this event, we will leave you the opportunity during the presentation to express yourself on a certain point through polls so that you can share your CDF experience. And at the end of my presentation, my colleague Pierre-Alain Bandinelli, who is also involved in this study, will be available to answer the questions you may have and discuss with you the result of our work. Okay, so let's start. Actually, we decided to initiate a quality of life study project 3 years ago because of an observation. Firstly, C. diff infection affect more and more people, especially since 2000, but you already know that, with very high severity, and mortality does not decrease, so very important topic. Second, this disease causes very disabling symptoms for patients. Some of them are very well known and described in the literature. It is the case of gastrointestinal manifestation, ranging from simple diarrhea to very serious GI complications, such as it is written, fulminant colitis or toxic megacolon that can be fatal, and this is pretty serious. However, at that time, so 3 years ago, we had the opportunity to speak with gastroenterologists taking care of CDI patients, and also to discuss directly with CDI patients, and we realized that the impact of the infection went far beyond just GI symptoms, and the impact of this disease was much more global, including consequences such as psychological impact on professional life, that were much less described in the scientific literature. However, at the initiation of the project in 2017, only one study had been published aiming at studying the quality of life of CDI patients. And since then, so they are mentioned here, 3 other studies have been published on this topic. It is better, but it remains very little number, especially considering the burden of this infection. And of note, none of these studies were qualitative studies. None compared the consequences of C. difficile infection during and after the infection, and none evaluated the long-term impact after the infection on quality of life. And this is from this observation that we decided to set up a survey to assess quality of life in patients experiencing or experiencing CDI. The goal was to highlight other consequences with strong impact on quality of life. But Just before going into the details of the results, please note that our study and all the data were very recently published 2 months ago in the GPRO, the Journal of Patients Reported Outcomes, and it's available in open access, so you can access it very freely. The link is provided at the end of this presentation. So this study is the result of the collaboration between two gastroenterologists based in the US who were principal investigator of the study. So Katarina Oneto, practicing at the Concord Medical Group in New York, and Paul Feierstadt, working at the Gastroenterology Center in Connecticut in Hamden. And in collaboration with the Volterra team composed of Pierre-Alain Bandinelli, Charles Courcel, Thibaut Galvin, and myself. The aim of this study was therefore to assess the impact of C. difficile infection on patients' quality of life in the United States by qualitatively assessing the consequences of the infection in all people who have experienced CDI. The study was then observational, as there was no intervention. It was simply a collection of the feedback from patients who have experienced the infection, and it was cross-sectional. That is to say that no other restriction criterion were applied in attempt to collect information from the CDI population as representative as possible. All patients were invited to answer around 30 questions in an online survey questionnaire. And the scope of the questions involved demographic questions, sex, health insurance, age, etc. Question about the C. diff infection in itself, including disease severity, treatments, symptoms, and number of recurrences. There were also additional questions which examined the patient's health-related quality of life, HRQOL. And this section includes and covers the impact of CDI on several aspects, for example, on daily activities, social interactions, work productivity, etc. Just as a precision, the survey was self-adaptive, and the total number of items each participant answered varied based upon their responses. Most questions were categorical, for example, yes/no question, and were complemented with non-compulsory open-ended field for comments. And these optional fields, were very valuable because it is a very a source of information, very interesting, and we will detail it later. Talking about the recruitment, it is also an opportunity to thank all the participants who voluntarily participated in the study. And it is also an opportunity to thank the Peggy Ladies Foundation, which kindly, through its website, through its newsletter, and other various ways of communication, enable us to disseminate the survey. And maybe some of you have participated in this study, and we thank you very much. It is very valuable to understand the burden of this disease. So now about the population surveyed. So only adults residing in the USA and having a personal history of CDI could be recruited. And overall, 350 participants were included. They were categorized into two groups. 1/3 of those were interviewed at the C. diff at the time of the survey, and the two other thirds, that is to say 235 people, had previously been infected by Clostridium difficile. And the C. diff was resolved at the time of the survey. About participant demographics. So the characteristic of participants were similar in both groups, that is to say, between current and past CDI group. And the majority of respondents were female, about 87%, and a little bit more than 55% were aged over 50. So as you can see, if you already have read a lot of literature about CDF, participants in our study are not fully representative of the CDI population, and women and people under 50 seems to be overrepresented in a sample, which is probably due to the data being collected through an online web questionnaire. This is our assumption. And this has led to maybe to younger people motivated patients who are technology savvy. Regarding the treatment, so at the time of completing the survey, 84% of participants were receiving a treatment for CDI. So just talking about these patients, the two most common treatments were vancomycin and metronidazole. And they were cited by about half of patients, and in another hand, fidaxomicin and FMT, fecal microbiota transplantation, were seen a bit less frequently, respectively by 17.5% and 10.3% of respondents. We can also see that probiotics were quite commonly used. Now, about recurrence. So the participants of first study also reported a very high recurrence rate. Almost half of them, 45%, reported at least one recurrence. And as you can see in the graph, among those who have reported at least one recurrence, more than half have experienced at least 3 episodes. And so these results have highlighted the very recurrent nature of the disease, and this feature of the infection contributes to the heavy burden. We would like to know if this percentage is verified in today's audience. So if you wish, you can take the poll that will be displayed, asking that if you or one of your relatives suffering from a CDI, did you or she or he experience a recurrence? So I will maybe give you a moment to answer in just a few seconds. Okay, moving on. So this study was very rich in teachings, but today we wish to dwell on the 3 main findings. So the first one, which was actually kind of expected, is the strong impact of C. difficile infection on patients' quality of life. So when we look at the results of all participants, which means patients who had the CDI ongoing at the time of the survey and patients with past history of CDI. A very large majority of respondents, 70%, report having physical consequences. And what is very interesting is to analyze the non-compulsory open-ended field, leave for comments. In these fields, we noticed that participants could explain how CDI impacted them without any guidance, and this is why it is interesting. So example of quotes are right at the bottom of the slide, and on the subject of physical consequences, we can see that more than 40% of respondents spontaneously reported pain, some of them being part of the group of patients having experienced the infection in the past. For example, we can see that a respondent stated that he still experiences quite a lot of pain from inflammation, and this is after the infection. Another often cited physical consequence is the fatigue, the weakness. These consequences reported also spontaneously by almost 40% of participants. And we can also note that almost 20% spontaneously reported the loss of appetites and or weight loss. And sometimes it is quite major. We can see that the participant declared having lost 50 pounds. It is very important to understand that due to the optional nature of this field, these figures can be considered as very underestimated. What is also interesting is to note that an equally large population of participants reports psychological consequences, and among the manifestations that are the most spontaneously cited, there is stress and anxiety, cited by almost half of the participants, 45%, depression, cited by more than 1 in 3 subjects, so around the 37%. And so we were kind of, it was not expected to have such high numbers. And I let you read some of the patients' quotes. They are extremely strong, and they really allow to measure the impact that sedative can have on the life of some patients. We also noted that a share of respondents, 50 subjects, corresponding to 14.3%, spontaneously mentioned the fear of transmitting the disease. And actually, contagiousness is indeed one of the characteristics of the pathology, and as we see, can have a psychological impact and consequence on social life of patients. Now, if we look at this slide, so finally, it is the impact of daily activities that stands out the most, with 3/4 of respondents declaring that they are impacted in their daily activities. And this reveals different aspects, and as you can see, about 37% spontaneously reporting having changed their eating habits. And one of the participants, and it is not the only one, mentioned that in particular that he could not eat anything, only the bread diet, which is a diet consisting only of bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast, which is indeed really restrictive. We can also see that 1/4 of participants mentioned a limitation of their movement. And actually, when analyzing the results, we were able to see that many patients reported this feeling of feeling trapped at home. And finally, also, nearly 1/4 of patients mentioned limiting contacts with others, and in particular romantic family and friends and relationships. So at this stage, I will remind you that all the figures I mentioned in the previous 3 slides come from comments with optional nature. So this figure can be very considered as underestimated, and the conclusion of these results, which are not exhaustive, but they illustrate the strong and global impact of the infection. Okay, so the second findings we wanted to highlight today is one which for us was a bit less obvious before the conduct of this study, and it is the long-lasting nature of CDI consequences. So the long-lasting nature of this infection was highlighted in our study because we did not show any difference between patients with past CDI and patients with current CDI when comparing the percentage of participants reporting physical or psychological consequences. And just so you know, it is not mentioned here, but it is also interesting to note that some symptoms, such as, for example, IBS, were even identified more frequently after CDI. And this reconfirmed the previously documented high frequency of IBS following CDI. And it is estimated about 25% of patients having these symptoms after CDF. We can also see that almost all current CDI participants, nearly 94%, admitted that their daily activities were impacted by the infection. And this trend was also seen in the past CDI cohorts, a bit less frequently, 65%, but still remains very high. Now, if we look at the results only in patients with a resolved CDI, so the past CDI group, and if we look at the consequences of the infection as a function of the time since the last CDF. So each curve, we can see it there, each curve represents a consequence of the infection. And what is interesting is to see that the curves are relatively flat. And this suggests that the rate of respondent mentioning each of the consequences, so for example, the physical consequence, the psychological consequences in red, the impact on daily activities, the impact on work, and of work stop also. So it is exactly, they remain comparable regardless of the time of the last CDI. So these results are, in my opinion, very, very valuable because we realize that the CDI consequence lasts over time after the infection. So again, we offer you the opportunity to answer a new poll to check if the results we just mentioned, so the high impact and the long-lasting nature of the CDI, if you agree with this result from your experience. So please, if you are involved, if you have an experience with CDF personally or with relatives or your patient, from your experience after an episode, do patients still encounter physical consequences, psychological consequences, and impact on daily activities? And again, I will give you a moment to answer this poll. Okay, so move on to the last finding. So last but not least is the strong impact of recurrences, which is the third key lessons from this study. So as you can see on the graph, when we compare participants with any recurrence with patients having a single episode, which means without any recurrence, those with at least one recurrence have significantly higher rates of physical and psychological consequences, greater impact on daily activities, and greater impact on work activities too, and also more work interruption either during or after the infection. And this is not showed there, but during the survey, we also noted that when considering the number of reported recurrence, participants with a greater number of episodes showed a trend to report harmful consequences at higher rates. So this was kind of expected, but it confirmed that CDI recurrences impact negatively patients' quality of life. And so during the study, we also wanted to know and to ask some questions about the fear associated with CDI, and results are very interesting. So we can see that 87% of respondents declare being afraid that their last Clostridium difficile infection could come back again. and also to the question on a scale from of 0 least to 10 most on a daily basis. How fearful are you that C. difficile will return? Almost 80% answered a score between 5 and 10, and about 1/3 of respondents choose 10, the maximum. And what we can see there is in both groups, any antibiotics intake was highly correlated to infection recurrence. Almost all respondents expressed this fear of future recurrence in the event they were in need of a concomitant antibiotic in the future for various infection diseases. So this fear was persistent after the clearance of CDI. We have about 97% of past CDI respondents reported this fear. It was like 99% in the current CDI group, so patients with ongoing CDI at the time of the survey. So in conclusion, this study is one of the first to assess the CDI consequences reported by participants during and after CDI. What is important to remember is that it confirmed the significant impact of CDI on both patients with active CDI and in patients with a history of CDI. It also highlights the long-lasting nature of this infection. We have no difference between the past and the current CDI cohorts. And a result really reinforced the need for enhanced therapeutics in the prevention and treatment for Clostridium difficile infections. So if you want to know more about our study and the results, full results are available in two sources. So first, the open-ended fields analysis results are available in a poster that was presented 2 years ago at the ACG, so the American College of Gastroenterology. And the full result of the questionnaire are available in the publication I mentioned earlier, which was published in the GPRO in February. And these publications are in open access and freely accessible at those links. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so we are back. I'm here with Pierre-Alain from Volterra, Lisa's colleague, and we already have a couple of questions. So Ana Diaz asks, what are other opportunities to increase education of these findings?
So in fact, I mean, in addition of the publication in the Journal of Patient-Reported Outcomes, we also presented the results in the at the American Congress of Gastroenterology, and in fact, the poster about that study, I mean, got a prize. I mean, the prize of the best poster regarding quality of life, and so we all thought, I mean, it was a big and very very nice surprise, and it was a very nice opportunity to make sure that all gastroenterologists out there in the audience were aware of the issue and quality of life issue for patients with CDF. So this is one big point, and we are also considering working on a follow-up publication based on that work, focusing more on the quotes and the spontaneously reported outcomes. What you have seen in the presentation of Lise is a mix of two. In the publication, you have mainly an analysis of the feelings reported in the questions, but we have also done an analysis of all the quotes, and they are very powerful. We were surprised to see all those powerful quotes from patients. And before turning to the other questions, I would just add a few words. That study was really transformative for all of us at Volterra. I mean, you understood that we are developing products to help patients and to prevent C. diff infections, and it was very informative to realize that the disease is not just an acute disease that takes a few weeks to get away, but that it has strong impact on the life of patients for a very, very long time. I mean, it gives you when you realize that, and I know that everyone in the company now has seen that, when you do realize that, you have powerful motivations when you wake up and say, okay, what I am doing is clearly for the good of patients. And if we can avoid even only a handful, and we hope much more than that, but if we can avoid a few cases of C. diff infections, it's really worth it.
Yeah, I think that's quite true. I mean, I think that there was, and Lise mentioned this in her report, in her thing, but there were some other smaller studies before this that kind of hinted at the sort of quantitative, sort of how extreme and how many people were suffering from this. So to have this much bigger study, I think gives a lot of credibility to us as advocates to say, like, for many people, this will be a lifelong, or
exactly.
Or they will need supportive care, they will need counseling, they will need some help readjusting to life. And I think that, having this data is really great for us because it helps us to make that case when we do lobbying or we talk to other healthcare providers. All right, so we got a few more. So we got to ask, is medication ever recommended, like anti-anxiety or depression, or is that outside your area of expertise?
So yeah, I mean, I will not be able to recommend. I mean, what I can say is go and see your physician. And if you go to see a physician that is used to treating patients with CDI, they are certainly aware of the huge impact of depression on the life of patients, and they will recommend what is best for you. But clearly, I will not be in a position to make any personal recommendation. Clearly, what we have seen is that patients are really depressed, and it's important because it's not it's not patient related, it's also disease related. So the feeling we have is we need to prevent C. diff, we need to cure C. diff, and we need to know that patients may feel depressed, and so it has to be taken into account when treating patients with C. diff. And it was as mentioned in the presentation, we have worked with two gastroenterologists, Paul and Katarina, and I think it was not that clear for them. They were treated a lot of CDI patients, but I think it came as a shock even for them to see how many patients were feeling depressed even a very long time after a C. diff infection. And so hopefully when gastroenterologists are aware of that, or other physicians are aware of that, they may keep that in mind and make sure that the long-term treatment are adapted to that condition.
Yeah, and I mean, even I think there's a question mark as to, like, is there an impact of the gut microbiome on mood? And there has been some research suggesting that those things are connected. We don't know the exact causation, but I think it's certainly worth noting. So Kimberly, I see your question. 2 years and 9 months after an FMT, I'm still having symptoms of CDI. I'm wondering if this is lifelong. I think that is a question that we can't necessarily answer, but we do know people who continue to struggle with physical and socio-emotional symptoms long after they are considered cured. And I think hopefully this research helps us bring more awareness to that. Another question whether or not this research has been shared with infectious disease doctors.
Good question. So every time we have the opportunity to present those data, we do, and we had a large audience with gastroenterologists, but not that much with ID specialists. Now, that being said, now that the publication is out, all the people motivated by the C. diff space could handily get access to it. And it has been published open access, and it was something that we decided to do so that as many patients, as many physicians could have access to it without being asked to pay for it. And we thought that for that topic, it's very important. I mean, if you would like to make sure that everyone is aware of those consequences, you need to do so. The quick reply to your question is no, we haven't had the opportunity to present that to a big infectious disease audience, but maybe we will have in the future. I mean, with a follow-up study, we may have opportunities to present that in more infectious disease-oriented congresses.
Yeah, we should. I mean, we should certainly talk about that, because I think that that's something that, like, our folks who work in infectious disease, we might be able to help make that happen.
We would be very happy about that. I mean, we did. I mean, if we did that study, it's for it to be potentially helping out there. So do not hesitate. Yeah.
So I have a question. Are there any studies about the impacts of CDI on quality of life of family members, either during or after the death of a family member? With CDI, obviously.
In fact, I think it has not been done. I mean, everything we have seen is focused on the patients. It's a very legitimate question. I mean, what about the impact on the other people in the household? I mean, all the one who cared about the patient that got the disease. It's a very nice one. No, I haven't seen anything about that. I think it's a fascinating question. Very good idea. It's clearly something, and maybe to give a little bit of context, this is even something that is not that often taken into account in pharmacoeconomics. In when you think about patients, people very often tend to think about the patient only. And so it's a very good recommendation that you do that. We need to think outside of the patient and also think about all the family that could be impacted. And you have seen, I mean, many patients reported that the disease had very deep impact on their family life. And so you are totally right that there should be, or there could be, a strong impact for the family members as well. So as far as I know, it had not been studied, but I think it's a very legitimate concern, and it would be a very good question.
Yeah, there's a group that we had been trying to do we had asked to do a presentation during our summit, but primarily I think because of COVID and the impact that it's had on their work, they weren't able to do it. But it's the National Caregivers Alliance, and that's for people who are not paid but are caring for a loved one at home who's elderly or chronically ill, and they have a lot of resources for people who are dealing with that. They're not CETA specific, but it could be useful for those kind of questions. But I agree that it's something, because this has almost a particular nature to it, which is the fear of infecting somebody or being infected. Or I think we're seeing this a lot now with COVID. I suspect you're seeing it in France as well, but we're seeing in the US where, doctors and nurses are not going home to their families. They don't want to risk, spreading it. And COVID is significantly more contagious than C. diff. But, if you
still
are for long enough, it starts to work on your head. Let me see. We had a few questions. All right, so Donna, that question is kind of beyond our expertise about Saccharomyces boulardii. There is, I definitely know physicians that recommend like restoring your microbiome, taking probiotics, eating foods that contribute to a healthy gut microbiome. There's definitely resources about that on our website. I really think it depends on the doctor as to whether or not they're going to have a very, medical pharmaceutical approach or more of a broader sort of integrative approach.
What I can add to that, I mean, in this study, we have seen that almost 1/3 of patients were recommended to take probiotics. So I think that indeed many physicians are certainly aware of probiotic-based approaches to help alleviate the suffering of C. diff or help contribute to the cure of C. diff. But clearly there is no, I mean, as you said, Christian, there is no strong consensus for now on the efficacy, and I think this is why many physicians would recommend yes, costly but innovative and quite effective drugs against C. diff. So I think they try to sometimes combine the different options. But yeah, I mean, I think many of them are aware of probiotics and do recommend them.
So Wendy asks, is there any push for increased public awareness / education? So we're doing that. We launched a campaign in November. We're going to be updating it and bringing it back this fall, called CC Diff. And then I don't know, Pierre, are you aware of specific things happening in France or Europe, maybe?
Well, I mean, I know that some patients group are quite active in the UK. In France, not that much that I'm aware of. But you know, I mean, in France, we are not very much used to. I mean, we don't have many patients association. It's not the way that it works. So I think it's very cultural. I mean, different ways to see health. I think we are more private about it in France. But clearly, I mean, what you do. Yeah. Anyway, what you do at the beginner is certainly helping a lot, increase public awareness and education, and so. And there is, and that said, there is an increasing number of publications, not only on quality of life, but on any aspects of C. diff. Maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, a number of publications have been out there. So I think all of that is getting digested and understood by physicians, by everyone, and so hopefully this will progress.
So Wenda, I should say, asked, has there been any research on the after effects of CDI on internal organs such as liver or kidneys?
Not that I know of. It's a good question indeed. I mean, it's legitimate to see that if you have some psychological or the physical long-term consequences, it might mean something about the organs or bodily functions. Well, no, I'm not aware of that.
No, but that is a good question. I mean, I would, especially if it's something like, you know, we certainly know that there are other diseases that the treatment of them does impact kidneys, liver, things that process drugs. I mean, that would be, also people sometimes after CDI have like malabsorption issues where they don't absorb vitamins and nutrients the way that they did before. So I suspect the answer is that there is an effect, but I don't know if there's been any real studies on that. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Something that potentially the foundation could push to some researchers, because it's a very legitimate research question.
Yeah, it is a good question. So let me see. Do we have any other? There's been a lot of chatting in here, but I think that was the last question we had. Any other questions before we let Pierre-Alain get back to his evening in France? What is it, 8 o'clock there?
So anyway, thank you very much for the time. I mean, it was really a pleasure to intervene in the Congress and share the results of the publication and study on quality of life. And so, I mean, please do not hesitate, Christian, to disseminate the presentation afterwards. And I put the link in the chat. I put the link to the publication and the poster presented at the American Congress of Gastroenterology. And I think there are very good ways to dig deeper and get more information on quality of life. So thank you very much to everyone.
Yes, thank you for being here. Take care.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. So we have a break coming up. We definitely encourage you again to check out. We definitely encourage you to check out the expo. Check out the sponsors. When we come back at 2:10, we're going to have a presentation that I'm really excited about. As many of you may know, our mother's C. diff infection and her death as a result of that infection was precipitated by going to the dentist and being given an antibiotic for a dental procedure. So So coming up, we have Dr. Katie Suda and her colleague Mal Tempe from the American Dental Association, and they're going to be presenting on the untold history of C. diff in dentistry. So again, stretch your legs, take a bathroom break if you need it, and then we will be back at 2:10 p.m. Eastern with Mal and Katie to talk about C. diff in dentistry. So we will see you all back here shortly. Thanks.